Hi, everybody. This is Christopher, Mr. Socrates Cafe, Phillips. This is my newest brainchild program. It's called Cafe Aretista. I have to be at a cafe because I'm Mr. Socrates Cafe while I do it. Background noise, I'm very used to it. Some other people are not. But an Aretista is my coinage, Chris McGown. And I learned from my Greek grandmother, my yaya, that arete is the original Hellenic Greek word for living a life of all-around excellence, where you try to break down the divides in knowledge between, tooty, snotty people and regular people. I've never met a regular person, actually. If you ever meet one, you bring them to me. I want to meet them. So Chris, this is Christopher C.L. McGown. You are a donor, engagement, and communications expert, long time with the Salvation Army. You're based in Kentucky, but you also go to far-flung places.
I do. I've been to all 50 states. 49 of the 50 states. Haven't made it to Hawaii yet. You find an excuse.
Where my brother was born.
Really? Yeah.
All kinds of stuff happens in Hawaii. I mean, they just almost had a nuclear thing a couple years ago, remember? They got this warning.
But they didn't invite me out there. I mean, what can I say?
Well, what did you go to Alaska for?
It was actually a personal trip. My grandfather, his sister lived there. So had a lot of fun there.
Oh, that's a place I've always wanted to go. There's actually a number of Socrates cafes there.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And a number in Kentucky, including one that was in Fort Campbell.
In Fort Campbell or Fort Knox?
Where's Fort Campbell?
Fort Campbell's outside of Tennessee. Outside of Nashville.
Fort Knox is. Oh God,
Fort Knox is just south of Louisville here. It's the home of our gold reserves and was armor.
Oh.
Yeah.
Great. So Chris, I want to talk to you for a little bit. You've been one of our steadfast supporters of our efforts for Socrates Cafe / Democracy Cafe. And why is it that, I get no philanthropic funding of any kind, but I have these people who are basically libertarian-ish, who somehow find me and we connect, and they sort of like what I do, and they, in very unique ways, support what I do. And you're one of those people. What is it about? Because there's this misconception that I'm this liberal, ultra progressive. I am by my conception, classical liberal. But when people who are orthodox fundamentalist liberal find that I'm not one of them, they get a little bent out of shape. What is it about Socrates Cafe that seems to have this appeal to libertarianish folks?
Well, I think that the libertarian concept very much aligns with the Socratic concept, right? Every opinion has an import. You can learn from anybody. At the same time, you don't give up your beliefs, but you try to envelop them, and they try to envelop you, and you try to build each other up, which is the basis of sort of Socratic concept, right? Is everybody building one another, drawing to a greater conclusion. The idea of synergy, right? The parts are greater, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so that aligns with the libertarian concept of, you do what you want to do, I'll do what I want to do. We'll support each other. We don't have to like each other. We can support it and know that you have the right and the ability to go do that.
Well, we may not have to like each other, but I have to say that at a Socrates Cafe, when it's operating on all pistons, there's sort of a love. Even if and as we disagree and diverge deeply on any concrete matter, there's sort of this love and affection. I mean, I have formed fast friendships with very odd bedfellows just as a result of putting this out in the mix. And it gives me hope and heart. I couldn't do what I do without faith and optimism in my fellow humans in what some people consider dark and gloomy times. And they can point to lots of different compelling reasons for that. But no,
right.
Even if and as we diverge deeply on things, that we come together and we feel something.
Yeah, I think genuineness fosters that.
I love it. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So one of the things that comes across from you and from others in different Socrates cafes is a genuine interest in others. And they were as interested in the person as what's behind them and what makes them tick. And when that happens, you can forget, forgive, and move past a whole number of issues because I care about the whole person. And I don't categorize them in one camp or another. They are my brother or my sister, and I want to get to know them. I don't agree with myself all the time, much less anybody else, right?
Exactly.
And so, but I want to know people, and I want to get to know them, and I want to connect with them. You personally come across, and that's just who you are, right? There's no way to disguise that, and there's no way to fake that. And so you have this natural draw to people who are drawn to other people who like people.
Well, talk about contradictions. Look at my background. I mean, my father's family immigrated dirt poor from Greece through Ellis Island. So I was brought up, my Greek grandmother, my yaya, became one of the first teachers of Greek language and culture in Tampa Bay. So she foisted this stuff on me but on the other side, and I write about this too, my mother's family came from Essex, England, and one side, the higher class part, went to Williamsburg, and one of them was in the House of Burgesses, but my mother's part she was born and raised in a coal mining camp in Appalachia. It's where my mother, I have photos of the cabin she was raised in. So and then, she broke away from the Jehovah's Witness faith she said they couldn't answer her questions. And she's this inveterate questioner. She's one of those people, you get in a line with her in the grocery aisle, people start sharing their life story with her. That kind,
Right.
So I have this really incredible confluence of traditions that, believe it or not, my mother's incredible listening, and then the whole Greek thing, which here I am doing. I started this in my late 30s, man. But I felt this was in the Clinton impeachment era when we were polarized. And so people talk about how we're in dark times, but I don't know. I don't know if that's really true.
Well, I would not disagree with that we're in dark times. I just don't know that our times are any darker than they have been. I think one of the things is we're more aware of it now. And the 24-hour news cycle feeds it, and social media keeps it in the forefront of our minds more so than ever before. But I am willing to concede that I think people are less a group of people are less tolerant, and they retract into their own and define that tribe's mentality. It's us and them. So I believe that exists, and because it is so over the top, it's what gets attention. It's what gets press. It's what gets play, and it becomes either a rallying cry or a point of a joke. So both ends use it. So I think that's there. I just don't believe it's any more pronounced. It's just more popular, more present.
One of the Democracy Cafe dialogues I like to focus on is how do we become an informed citizen, and listen to people's remarkably similar notions of how we become informed citizens, but there are remarkably different ways of going about it.
Correct. Right.
And so I actually like that they, again, they discover uncommon common ground, even as they go to very deeply different sources. Like I used to go to the New York Times. It used to tell me who, what, when, where, why, how. Now I feel like it's more of an advocacy, agenda-related sort of steered publication. People get really mad at me. Their moderators, censors won't even post a lot of my comments when I take them to task for editorializing in their hard news pieces, and they won't even post them.
Well, I did this a few weeks ago with my two boys. I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they were discussing the news. And I said, okay, so we're going to watch the news tonight, and we're all going to keep tabs of what we actually believe is the time spent giving you facts versus the time spent commenting on, referencing on those facts. And so now this is a local news program. We did it 3 nights in a row. We did it with what I would consider a right-leaning local, a left-leaning local, and then a national program. And all 3 of them, for the 30-minute session, you had about 20 minutes of airtime, and about 15 of it was comments on, editorial on the actual 5 minutes of news delivered in that 30-minute period. So, and it didn't matter, right?
Right.
It was all the same. It's just different perceptions of the same thing.
Well, that's why I consider you an Aretista, because in large measure, because you have this, you're open in a way that less people than I would like are these days. And you listen to NPR, and you
I
also
love
listen
NPR.
to, yeah,
I'm a
but you
supporter of NPR.
and you're also a member of the NRA.
Yep.
And so like people think, oh, how can you do that? You are the devil in sheep's clothing or something like that. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
what? That's not a contradiction. Why in the world
No.
can't somebody do that? So Chris, so on your Twitter page, you're at CL McGown, MCGOWM. You describe yourself as father, husband, child of God, committed to a better world for my boys.
Yep. I start where the last man left off. That's my job.
Tell me a bit more about that.
About which part of it?
Just starting where the last person left off.
So we have to begin with the knowledge that, that there's nothing new under the sun, right? So my kids have an experience all through the day in their school, and I have to build on that. Sometimes it feels like I have to undo that, but I have to build on that. I am a product of my father and of my grandfather, and he is a product of his father and his grandfather. And so I continue to grow as they continue to grow. They had their grandparents. Sadly, both of their grandfathers have passed away, but they have the men in their lives as well. And not just men. So I say start where the last man left off, but it isn't a gender based, right? Because their mother's very engaged. I mean, we're a family, and we view it holistically. And their grandmothers are very involved in their life, and so we constantly trying to build a better world, holistically better world, so that my kids have a better place to be and a better life to lead. So I view my job as a parent in that.
So is that your overarching philosophy of life and living as well, or would you add to that?
No, that's the overarching is that I want to build a better world, right? And it isn't necessarily what anybody would consider a better world, right? Ultimately, I believe that a better world is a far more inclusive and a less restrictive world, which is that libertarian side of my philosophy. And so I'm less inclined to think I need a law to go do that, but very inclined to know that's the right thing to do, and we need to find a way to convince them that's the right thing to do without bringing the act of law and the power of government into it.
I also love that you put child of God. There was this, again, a lot of people assume that Socrates Cafe somehow is counter to, there's many people who take part who see the world in what may be considered pretty fixed lenses. And yet they're nonetheless open by the Socrates Cafe conception. They really like to hear other people's stories and weigh and measure and compare theirs.
And as a child of God, I believe that's part of my role is to know who they are. Believers have a mission, and that's not to go save the world, but to share the good news. And so when you're sharing that, you can't do it confrontationally at any effect. Right? So we have to be engaged in it. We have to understand it. We have to love unconditionally. And so when you go into that concept, it makes the world a whole lot easier to deal with.
I used to think that Socrates Cafe was just something to exist in the matrices of formal places. But now, over the years, it's thrived at synagogues, at evangelical churches, Baptist churches, predictably at Universalist Unitarian churches.
Right.
I was just at a Lamb of God Lutheran Episcopalian church in Fort Myers, Florida, where we had this edgy, insightful discussion with about 150 of their members on what should a church do. And they found it so meaningful. It was what I would call a difficult dialogue. They were sort of at a crossroads.
As a church, it can be very difficult because you know what the right path is. Right? It's very clear from our belief what the right path is. But it's harder not to hoist that onto people who aren't in the same walk. And to understand it isn't our job to bring them or to condemn them or to condone that, right? Our job is to go in and share the good news and to share love, not to try to say you're wrong because you do this. That isn't our place in any way, shape, or form. The scripture is very clear about that, but we don't understand that elements of the scripture, or we don't apply that. We're so busy trying to give a reason to say no, we ignore all the signs of saying yes.
Oh, that's beautifully put. So your mission, as you put on your LinkedIn page and elsewhere, to help certain nonprofits thrive, and not just the Salvation Army. You're a sought-after consultant. Now, I'm a quirky nonprofit. We're a quirky nonprofit. I have had bizarre experiences with some philanthropic groups, and I actually go out of my way to mention one of them because to me it speaks to what I call the philanthropy charity industrial complex that's left-leaning, establishment liberal, that when they find out that I'm not one of them, they go out of their way to exclude me. I used to go to this annual retreat, and then they started excluding me, and I said, hey, somebody just told me that you're having another one. Where's my invitation? They said, write me this thing from the Russian Politburo, former USSR, say, well, we just decided you didn't fit into our age and demographics. So the word letters WTF go up in my brain. I'm like, gosh, this demonization. If you don't speak their code and go by their path, all of a sudden this very well-endowed nonprofit, these well-heeled executive directors are actually anti-entrepreneurial. They've never earned an honest buck in their lives. They get all their money from the now deceased founder. They steered it in this other direction. They claim to be fomenting dialogue about equity, but their notions of what that amounts to are so microscopic, it frightens me.
And rightfully so. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, that this camp of people who, it's the tribe, right? You're either in the tribe or you are the enemy of the tribe. And while I do believe it's a small percentage, it's definitely out there. And the nonprofit world has always been notorious about the us and them. Ooh. And where I've always said a rising tide raises all ships, there are plenty of nonprofits out there that say, if you support X, there's no way we want you because you supported them, right? I can't possibly give to the NRA and give to the NPR. Right? You can't. I will hate you. And
you have the spirit of 76 rabble-rousing ethos within you. No, it's true. These were people who came together. They were remarkably diverse, but they believed in that. A rising tide raises all ships. They believed in that. And so maybe like 1% who have this really narrow view on the left, but they have the overwhelming bulk of funding in that area.
They do, and they are very keen to keep it. And if you're doing anything that's going to jeopardize their perception of their fair share, you've now become a threat. And the easiest way to eliminate the threat is to discredit it, not to destroy it.
Well, that's when I get it. I mean, it actually makes me redouble my efforts, quite honestly. But at the same time, it makes me a little glum that the very folks who claim to be promoting and fomenting dialogue are actually impediments to it sometimes.
And I agree with you. But at the same time, I'm willing to bet if I were to speak to them, they would tell you how they have to. So much like it's happening in Facebook right now. So Facebook has gone about and they're now eliminating, they're going through and removing content that they deem to be irresponsible content around the coronavirus. Right? So they're going in, they're saying, hey, this is bad information and removing it. Right? So they think they're doing the right thing by playing moderator and by saying, you don't fit inside this cone, thus we're going to remove it because we believe it to be bad. And I'm willing to bet if I were to speak to that group, they would say the same thing. And that, to me, is the greatest scare, is they actually legitimately believe what they say.
Oh, they do. You know, this one group I'm referring to, they even have rapid response funding now to anything against Trump, a.k.a. the devil. anything that he does, they'll get any group that claims to be countering anything that he's doing, they'll give them beaucoup funding, rapid response. I'm thinking, what about nuance? What about thinking in colors? Can't we look at the fact that immigration, my family immigrated, for God's sake, is a nuanced issue that we need to think about in nuanced ways. This idea that all immigration good, Trump demon and bad. Well, Obama's gotten a free pass on the fact that he was the deporter in chief. Most of the Mexicans I meet.
I laugh at. Every time I hear that title, I snicker out loud. Yes, you're absolutely right. The pictures of the kids in cages, that was during the Obama administration. Not that it didn't happen when Trump, and not since Trump's been involved, right? But the famous photos have all been prior to that. I'm not defending it one way or the other, right?
No, I feel great pain for any child who has to be traumatized for life in such circumstances. All I'm saying is this goes much further back. But the media, mainstream media, doesn't point out the fact that most of the Mexicans I meet when I'm in Mexico on my travels, they were deported under Obama. They have 20-year sentences where if they dare to go back to the U.S., where they were working their butts off and they got stopped in some minor traffic infraction, they'll get really in hot water. But let's look at it in more broad brush and honest terms than what's being painted now.
We're not particularly interested, especially now, we're not interested in that nuance. That nuance is far too challenging to get across in a 3-second blurb.
Yeah.
And so and let's be clear, you know as well as I do, controversy sells. You look at what headlines get clicked on any news site, no matter where you are on the spectrum, it is the most absurd of the headlines. And taking that absurd point of view and going I love how what I would call euphemism of taking to its logical conclusion, which is never a logical conclusion, right? It's the most absurd, but taken to its logical conclusion, you will see how all of a sudden we have no borders. What? Yeah, and so, but that's what sells, right? And as long as our media continues to need the clicks to make money, and they need to have the extreme points of view to get the airtime and the click through, and so that they're not having to defend themselves on these radical tribes, because the media does not want to have to say, no, this is a fair, impartial view, right? They don't want, so they lean towards one extreme or the other, both, and not neither side is neutral. A friend of mine once said it's not a polar line, it's a circle. It's just where on the circle of insanity you fall. Where one ends, the other begins. It's just one constant circle of growing discord.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about rapid response, because there's another kind that you do that I think is so vital. So when a disaster happens, you are in the front lines, and you and your team at the Salvation Army, you go and you don't care about background or political persuasion or anything. You go and help people who are in distress.
Yeah, and so that's the fascinating thing. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of responding in a number of disasters, from local up to national, broad spectrum of them. And that's the fascinating things about disasters is they don't care. The hurricane doesn't care what side of the political spectrum you are. The hurricane doesn't care whether you're rich or poor. And so, in the same way our response doesn't, right? If you're responding in the time of a disaster, you're not taking time to check for green cards. You're not taking time to check for whether or not you social economically apply, whether or not you're poor enough to get this. You're hungry, you're thirsty. There's what you're giving. And that goes back to the overall mission, right? That's when you were hungry, I gave you food. When you were thirsty, I gave you drink. When you were weary, I gave you rest. And so that's where we come back to as an organization. I have the privilege of being a part of that, a very, very, very small part of it, but it's amazing work that allows us to see people in this, in a way that allows us to see them for who they are, not who they want us to believe they are, right? Not who the world wants to believe they are, but who they are at that particular moment, that particular need, to respond very quickly and very immediately with very tangible results as well as intangible.
And it also jibes so well with your own philosophy as a father and an individual human being.
It is, it's getting harder to explain to my boys why I'm gone for 2 weeks here and there. We were the last time we were deployed. My son went on to it was part of an academic team, and he went on to the states, to the state finals, and I wasn't there. They're like, well, why weren't you there? Well, I had to be here. And so it becomes this, it is a challenge, but it's part of helping them understand that a better world is larger than the four of us. And so it is a holistic view, and helping them understand that sometimes you take one for the team, and that means the greater team.
Have you been able to pretty effectively convey that to your kids?
I think so.
It's not easy, is it?
No, it isn't easy, and they'll never fully understand because they don't understand that nuance. Going back to your word, right? And so that of competing demands that are both economic as well as emotional as well as the greater good, to the immediate response of, but you weren't there. And that's harder. I think intellectually they understand it, but I'm not sure emotionally they're there yet. And to be honest with you, there are times I'm not either.
Interesting. So, Chris, we're talking today on February 3rd, which is the very first caucus in Iowa.
And my 19th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations. You and your wife, unless you got me fooled, y'all seem like just a great...
Oh, no, I married way above my class. I did very well for myself.
I did too. It's a beautiful...
So anyway, yes, today's the caucus.
So, I mean, I'm feeling a little bit burnt, because I actually just like people with integrity, which seem to have certain virtues regardless of what their political bent is. And I'm wondering, I mean, at the same time, I'm a little glum that I go, is this really the best roster of statesmen and stateswomen that I'm looking for that we're going to come up with? So I have mixed feelings about it. But at the same time, I mean, I'm thinking, okay, we're back to the process. Let's see where we're at.
So my grandfather loved to say, nobody I'd want to vote for would ever run. It's just too painful of a process. The process doesn't allow genuineness, right? It's unforgiving of mistakes. It's unforgiving of errors. It's unforgiving of anything that doesn't toe a line. And so the very best of the people won't make it through because the process doesn't want them to. So I'll be honest with you, it's not an American process. It's a Republican and Democratic process. And it's those two parties that are preventing the American dream from playing out inside of its overall system.
Well, do you think there will ever be a time, as there was earlier on in our process, when there might actually be viable parties that they call them now fringe parties, but a time when a Green Party or a Libertarian Party can actually just become one of the parties again, where it's not just these two major, rather corporate-driven parties?
Not unless we change the way we view the preliminary process. So right now, they're controlled by the states. The states have control over what a preliminary looks like. The states then cede that to the parties. And so the Republican Party gets to choose how their primaries work inside of their state. And as long as that's the case, I think it's going to be very, very hard for someone to break through, because you're asking a pin to poke through the concrete. And it is a very real challenge. If we move away from some of the funding structure, or we move away from, take more of an England point of view and stop this politicking for 3-4 years and look at, a 6-month window, I think then there's a real opportunity. But I just don't know. It breaks my heart, partly because some of those fringe parties truly deserve the name fringe. I bend towards libertarian, but we've not had a good track record of people who are running for office who don't sound absolutely insane. So that's problematic. And I will never say money controls an election. I just don't believe that. If I believed that, I would believe Mitt Romney would be our president. oh gosh, what was the guy's name in Texas? Perot. Perot would be our president, right?
Okay.
If money controlled elections, they would have won, because they had lots of it and they spent lots of it, and neither one of them won. But I don't know where it's going to come from. I honestly want it to. I just don't know.
Well, I mean, honestly, I take hope and heart in people like you. Who, where you get there in the mix every day. You wake up. I mean, you don't win the day. You dust yourself off and you go again. And that's to me what democracy is about. Not my way or the highway, but look, sometimes and having a long view. Thinking about your children, and not just your children, but generations from hence, and trying to make that a better world for them. So
I think we have to go the multi-party route. I'm hopeful. I really am. I'm hopeful that we can get to the point where either we do away with parties entirely, if that's even possible, and allow people to stand on their own, or get to a point where there are multiples in the mix. And I'm not a huge fan of the English concept of the way they run their parliaments, but oh, there you go. You're back?
yeah. So, but that, Chris, that speaks to the fact, what you were saying was that our framers of our Constitution that we have today, they never anticipated the advent of political parties. They never,
they actually warned us against it. Yeah, it's not they didn't consider. They never. I don't think they ever envisioned the power they would have.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, all I can say is to be continued.
That's right.
I think that there's a lot of people of really goodwill and good heart who recognize that we're at another combination of crossroads, precipice, and who want to get out there in public places and spaces and mix it up and hear other people's stories, with the assumption that we're all operating from a place of genuineness and sincerity until and unless we have reason to think otherwise. And I think that's why our Socrates Cafe, Democracy Cafe, is thriving more than ever in times like this. And in very unexpected places across the fruited plain of the U.S. and across the world.
I would agree with that. To be able to go someplace, or even virtually go someplace, where diverse ideas are not only shared but embraced. I don't have to agree with you to embrace it. Is really a rewarding concept, and it's so foreign to what is the mainstream media would tell us the world's capable of. And we know darn well the world is capable of it. We've shown it time and time again through all the different cafes, the engagement and the involvement across the spectrum. So we know it's there. We just got to get someone to understand that that is the path forward, not this one sin and you're dead to me concept.
Amen. Chris McGown, donor engagement and communications expert at the Salvation Army, based in Kentucky. Thank you so much for everything, for being a huge and long-time steadfast supporter of our outreach, and just for being the person you are. Thanks so much, bro.
Thanks so much. Take care.